Discussing basics of sentencing guidelines in India. The Constitution of India provides for a holistic sentencing system which aims at achieving the twin objectives of retribution and reform. The Indian Penal Code (IPC) provides for various types of sentences such as death penalty, life imprisonment, rigorous imprisonment, simple imprisonment, etc. The Code of Criminal Procedure 1973 (CRPC) provides for the manner of imposition of these sentences. The Indian Penal Code and the Code of Criminal Procedure are the two main legislations governing sentencing in India. The Indian Penal Code lays down the types of sentences that can be imposed for various offences. The Code of Criminal Procedure provides the procedural law for imposition of sentences. The Indian Penal Code provides for following types of sentences. Number 1. Death penalty. The death penalty can be imposed for the offences of murder, rape, terrorism, etc. Number 2. Life imprisonment. Life imprisonment can be imposed for offences such as murder, rape, terrorism, etc. Number 3. Rigorous imprisonment. Rigorous imprisonment is a harsher form of imprisonment which involves hard labor and is imposed for offences such as robbery, dacoity, etc. Number 4. Simple imprisonment. Simple imprisonment is imposed for offences such as theft, cheating, forgery, etc. The Code of Criminal Procedure provides for the manner of imposition of sentences. It lays down the procedure for awarding different types of sentences. The procedure for imposition of death penalty is provided under Section 367 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. The death penalty can be imposed only by the High Court or the Court of Session. The procedure for imposition of life imprisonment is provided under Section 360 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. The life imprisonment can be imposed by any court. The procedure for imposition of rigorous imprisonment is provided under Section 361 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. The procedure for imposition of simple imprisonment is provided under Section 362 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. The Indian Penal Code and the Code of Criminal Procedure provide for a comprehensive and holistic sentencing system which aims at achieving the twin objectives of retribution and reform. History of Sentencing Guidelines in India. In India, the sentencing guidelines are not codified in any statute. The Indian Penal Code (IPC) provides for various punishments for different offences, but does not lay down any specific guidelines for the courts to follow while sentencing an accused. The Code of Criminal Procedure (CRPC) also does not contain any provision regarding sentencing. The Indian judiciary has, over the years, evolved its own sentencing principles, which are based on the IPC, CRPC and the Indian Evidence Act. The first reported case on sentencing in India is Emperor vs. Balram, 1862, in which the court held that the sentence should be commensurate with the offence. This principle was followed in a number of subsequent cases. In 1911, in the case of Empress vs. Ramakrishna Gopal, the court held that the sentence should be proportionate to the gravity of the offence. In 1958, in the case of State vs. Gurucharan Singh, the court held that the sentence should be just and fair, and that the punishment should fit the crime. This principle was reaffirmed in a number of subsequent cases. In 1971, in the case of Bachchan Singh vs. State of Punjab, the Supreme Court of India laid down the following principles of sentencing. Number 1. The sentence must be proportionate to the gravity of the offence. Number 2. The sentence must take into account the aggravating and mitigating circumstances of the offence. Number 3. The sentence must be just and fair, and not excessive or unduly lenient. These principles were reaffirmed in a number of subsequent cases, and have become the bedrock of sentencing in India. In 2013, in the case of Shreya Singhal versus Union of India, the Supreme Court held that the principles of sentencing must be strictly followed while sentencing an accused. The court also held that the sentencing process must be judicious and objective, and that the sentence imposed must be proportionate to the gravity of the offence. The sentencing guidelines in India are thus based on the principle of proportionality and take into account the aggravating and mitigating circumstances of the offence. These guidelines help the current sentencing landscape in India. The current sentencing landscape in India is one that is in a constant state of flux. There are a number of factors that contribute to this ever-changing landscape, including the political climate, the judiciary, and the public. In India, the punishment for a crime is determined by the Indian Penal Code, IPC. The IPC is a set of laws that were codified in 1860, and it is the primary source of criminal law in India. The IPC contains a section on sentencing, which lays out the different types of punishments that can be imposed for different types of crimes. The types of punishments that can be imposed under the IPC are: imprisonment for life, imprisonment for a term not exceeding 10 years, imprisonment for a term not exceeding 7 years, imprisonment for a term not exceeding 5 years, imprisonment for a term not exceeding 3 years, imprisonment for a term not exceeding 2 years, imprisonment for a term not exceeding 1 year, fine. The IPC also contains a section on aggravating and mitigating factors. These are factors that can either increase or decrease the punishment that is imposed for a crime. The aggravating factors that are listed in the IPC are: the offence was committed with a view to gain, the offence was committed for the benefit of the offender, the offence was committed with the intention of causing death or grievous hurt, the offence was committed with the intention of causing fear of death or grievous hurt, the offence was committed with the intention of causing bodily injury, the offence was committed with the intention of creating a public nuisance, the offence was committed with the intention of causing damage to property, the offence was committed with the intention of causing economic loss, the offence was committed with the intention of disrupting the public peace. The mitigating factors that are listed in the IPC are: the offence was committed under provocation, the offender is a first-time offender. The impact of sentencing guidelines on criminal justice in India. The impact of sentencing guidelines on criminal justice in India is significant. The guidelines provide a framework for courts to sentence offenders in a consistent manner, taking into account the gravity of the offence and the circumstances of the offender. They help to ensure that similar offenders are sentenced similarly and that the sentence imposed is commensurate with the gravity of the offence. The guidelines also aim to promote transparency and accountability in sentencing by providing clear and concise guidance to courts on the factors to be considered when sentencing an offender. In doing so, they help to ensure that sentences are just and fair, and that the public has confidence in the criminal justice system. The guidelines were introduced in India in 2006 and have been amended several times since then. They are currently in their third edition, which was issued in 2016. The guidelines cover a wide range of offences, from minor offences such as petty theft to serious offences such as murder. For each offence, the guidelines set out the maximum and minimum sentences that may be imposed, as well as the factors that should be taken into account when determining the sentence. The guidelines are not mandatory, but they are binding on all courts in India. Courts are required to take into account the guidelines when sentencing an offender and must give reasons for any departure from them. The guidelines have been generally well received by the judiciary, legal scholars and the public. They are seen as a positive step in improving the fairness and consistency of sentencing in India. However, there have been some criticisms of the guidelines, particularly in relation to their application in practice. Overall, the sentencing guidelines have had a positive impact on criminal justice in India. They have helped to ensure that sentences are more consistent and transparent, and that the public have greater confidence in the criminal justice system. The way forward for sentencing guidelines in India. The Indian Supreme Court, in its recent judgment in the case of Shri Shailendra Sharma v. State of Maharashtra, has held that the sentencing guidelines laid down by the Bombay High Court in the case of State of Maharashtra v. Belgaum alias Kale Nair are not binding on the lower courts. The court said that the guidelines were only meant to be followed by the High Courts and not by the lower courts. The court further held that the sentencing guidelines issued by the High Court cannot be said to be mandatory in nature and are only directory in nature. The court said that the lower courts are not bound by the sentencing guidelines and can take into consideration the facts and circumstances of each case to decide the sentence. The court's judgment has come as a setback to the reformative efforts being made by the Bombay High Court to ensure uniformity in sentencing across the state. The sentencing guidelines were issued by the High Court in 2013 with a view to ensure that the sentences imposed by the lower courts are just and fair and in accordance with the law. The guidelines were based on the recommendations of the Law Commission of India and were meant to bring about uniformity in sentencing in cases of similar nature. The guidelines were also meant to serve as a check on the discretion of the judges in imposing sentences. The court's judgment has, however, put a question mark on the future of sentencing guidelines in India. It is now to be seen whether the other high courts will follow the Bombay High Court's lead and issue similar guidelines or whether they will wait for the Supreme Court to lay down a binding precedent on the matter. Thanks for watching the video. We hope we have helped you learn something today. Stay tuned for more such content.